You can imagine word of that spread throughout the district. You know, the fact that we're all gathered here today to be delighted by the sounds of our wonderful barbershop quartet just testifies to the wonderful gift that sound and music is. And in fact, one of the things we've learned in medicine is that what speeds the healing process is what we perceive through hearing. You know, you just look for a second at the three healings specifically that Jesus is involved with today. Matthew, the tax collector, he needs to hear Jesus call him. And it's clear when the Pharisees sneeringly said he was a sinner, Jesus explains it's those who are sick who need a physician. The woman with the 12-year issuance of blood who had the audacity in those days to touch Jesus' cloak needs to hear Jesus say, "Your faith has healed you." And the little daughter of the synagogue leader who is presumed dead and who is being prematurely mourned only needs for Jesus to take her hand and call her by name. In all of these incidents, we see one very important thing happening. These people are, in their own way, calling out for help. And Jesus listens. And Jesus heals. We cry, and he hears. Perhaps this is the one thing that very recently in modern medicine that's missing. Modern medical groups have been taken over to maximize profits. And they think that the goal of the patient is to get in and out fast. That's not what we're looking for. What we're looking for when it comes to our health is for someone to listen to us. Really listen. For more than 30 years, Gary and I have gone to our doctor, who is a member of a practice he helped establish. And they established it away from the big conglomerates because they believed in spending time with patients. The one sure thing whenever we've gone is when I go for an appointment that my doctor is going to set aside a good half hour primarily to listen, to touch and advise. This is what his practice knew was important to all the patients. But now that this group has been taken over by a conglomerate in the last few months, the doctors have been told to keep their visits to 5 minutes only. No longer can I call the medical group to speak to a human being. I end up with only voicemail. And the voicemail tells me they'll call me back if they think my call is worth it. And my doctor has decided to retire rather than compromise his values. We're looking for another doctor right now. But that's the thing about Jesus. He never stops listening. Never. Because healing is in the listening. So much of what ails us is at the very least made worse by our situation being ignored. And we suffer in isolation when there's no one who's willing to listen or help. And at the very most, being an outcast because of our illness actually causes people not to understand. You know, I'm reading a paper right now by the renowned and late Princeton theologian Donald Capps. And the name of his paper is Jesus, the Village Psychiatrist. Dr. Capps was well versed in psychology and religion and saw many of the stories of healing, how sensitive Jesus was to the ways that the illnesses of people in their time were made worse by the anxiety and rejection that people faced, mainly because of their sickness. You know, in that day, and we've discussed this before, people believed that you got sick because you sinned, or your parents sinned. You know, while we modern folk look back at this kind of attitude and think of it as being kind of quaint, I have to ask you, don't we still do the same thing to some people who are hurting today. There are people who suffer from what I call invisible illnesses. They don't visibly bleed. They don't use a wheelchair or a cane. People who have depression or anxiety. People with migraine or fibromyalgia or any number of the things that we tend to chalk up to being all in their heads. We tell them, snap out of it. You remember Moonstruck? Snap out of it. Worse yet, for our children and young teens who are being bullied and are depressed from being bullied in person or online, we either tell our children sometimes to toughen up, or we ignore it because, after all, kids will be kids. There are far too many fatalities because of kids will be kids. Now, we really need to turn our attention to Jesus the physician, Jesus the psychiatrist, if you will. Because just like in Peanuts, in Lucy's, the doctor is in, and Jesus is always in to listen to us. We need Jesus to help restore harmony in our minds. You know, these last few days have been terrible for that, but I feel like I have sludge in my head from listening to the news. People in the throes of anxiety all view the world the same. No matter which side of an issue they're on, the one thing is that they think the other person's a threat, and there comes the anxiety. And if somebody's in a flight or fight mode, they're most likely to hit first and listen last. All of Jesus' healings in today's gospel contain a lesson that could be what we call a four-part harmony of healing. He calls to the marginalized. He sits with them. He touches them. He listens to them. Where do you find this doctor who is always in for you? This was a topic of a novel written by Taylor Caldwell in 1960. I read it when I was in high school. But it certainly fits today. In her tale, a generous, wealthy man erects a building in town that supposedly houses the listener. The listener. People who enter find a tall, dim room with a floor-to-ceiling curtain. And one after another, 15 people come privately and sit in front of the curtain. One who has been betrayed, another who's not accepted because of his skin color, a woman who's a social outcast, a father who cannot accept the pending death of his son. But each of them, the longer they talk to the listener, they sense more and more the presence of someone very much behind that curtain. Finally, someone pulls back the curtain to reveal a modest cross, not with a bloodied body of Jesus on it, but the figure of a triumphant Jesus, his arms outstretched to heal. He was listening to them, and he's listening still. He's there for you now and always when you seek him out in a quiet moment. You know, the ability to sing in harmony is all about listening. It's not tuning out the other guy's voice. It's about hearing him and then singing your own tune that enhances his. What we need today is to sing not in opposition to other voices, but in a way to combine with them and bring beauty and oneness to this world. We also need to listen to everybody who hurts, and not just those with the most obvious wounds. In essence, we are being asked by Jesus to become a physician's assistant, to reach out, to hear, to touch, to sit with, to start the healing. I want to thank the Mad Hatter Quartet for their healing today. Amen.